Okay, so anyway, this is a re-recording of a video that YouTube ate. I'm really sorry to anyone who kind of saw this tutorial or wanted to see the tutorial, and then all of a sudden they basically came there and it says YouTube has removed this video, blah blah blah, and that's because I had a YouTube just went and said the upload had failed, so it basically sat there for an hour saying it was processing, and then eventually one of my viewers came along and said, "Hey, the video's gone." And then I look in there and it says upload failed. So anyway, um, one of the problems that I see in a lot of amateur clothing designs is that they work out, really boring clothing. They just have a t-shirt or a pair of pants, and it's just, they just leave it like that. It's just this is it. It's like I'm done my t-shirt, and that's my character design. That's their costume design, their fashion design or their costume design. It's just a t-shirt or a sweatpants or something like that with just straight cut sleeves, and it's really boring. So there's a few things that you can do to make things a bit more interesting. One of those is to take the sleeves and you can flare them. Oops. So this is just a very simple flare that you can do. Another thing that works is with the flare, you can bias the flare. So if a person has their sleeve, has their arm passing through the sleeve like so, you can bias the flare to make it a lot longer, near the bottom. So again, it kind of simulates gravity as well, which is nice. And then, aside from just, again, straight cuts are just pretty boring as well. You can do trim lines. So that's what this video is about. It's about trim lines. And hold on a second. Here we are. So a trim line. Here, let me just do this to the other side, except without the arm passing through it. So I'll just put a bit of a stump there so I can see what's going on. Bias that. Cut that up. Okay, so a trim line would be a way that you end, the clothing. So you can just put a simple, a black border on it, or it could be any color, but just something that's different from the main color. And then if you want, you can, go black and white, or, something like that. Just gives it a little bit more visual interest. You can change the way that the end is cut as well. So I can put a simple even zigzag. So, oops, hang on. This is just an even zigzag. Okay. Now, one of the problems with this even zigzag is that all of the lines are parallel. And, maybe what I'd want to do is I'd want to radiate my lines outwards, meaning radiate, from this point here. So now what happens is I'd have to do one like that, follow this one, okay, and then that one, and then, and I'm trying to turn it, right? I'm trying to turn these zigzags. That looks a lot more interesting, right? That actually works. That's a much nicer way to handle the trim at the end, and then you can go in there and put in very small triangles, and that looks pretty cool. And then if you want this black line now kind of no longer looks quite right, so I'm going to lock the transparency and just get rid of it. And then instead of a shape cutting tool, I'll use a brush, because I find brushes are better for lines, whereas so I'm going to put this trim line back into it. And now I have a number of ways to do this. I can either just zigzag like this. All right, so that's one way to do it. I can zigzag and follow those little divots, those little smaller bits. Okay, that's another way you can do it. Or I can do this. I'm going to not follow it. I'm just going to follow only the large ones. And then I'll go in and I'll apply small things in there. So this makes for another very interesting pattern. And even this doesn't have to be all kept, monospaced. Like the width of the line doesn't have to be mono, doesn't have to be all the same. So if I can go in here and I can peak. See that I'm applying a peak pattern to it. And then I can repeat the peak. Oops. Yeah, it's kind of tricky to do this. If you have any smoothing functions, like if you're using Paint Tool Psi or something like that, then definitely make use of that peak. You make use of the smoothing functions. I'm using a fair amount of smoothing in TV Paint. There's a smoothing option for that. So as you can see, it makes a really, really cool border trim. Generates a whole lot more interest. It's so much more interesting than just seeing a simple flat edge. Also, when I was talking about how the fabric could be trimmed, right? Instead of just simple 90-degree trim, another thing I like to do is this. I like to, it's a simple flare. Like this is like, instead of a flare, it's more of a, it's like a ripple like that. And you can combine it, you can do like a kind of a billowing effect, and then you can also put on, your zigzag pattern afterwards. And the zigzags, it doesn't always have to be zigzag. You can use, I'll just paint in black because it's easier to see. All right, so that's it's an alternating round. So instead of using zigzags, I'm using rounds. You can do this. You can use round and then peak and then round and then peak and then round and then peak. Right? So really, it's the thing is that whenever you want to get any kind of variety, you don't get variety by just going crazy and random. You get variety by having patterns. And if your pattern is not interesting enough, then you must alternate. You can alternate two different patterns together, or you can do, and the thing is, it's not just, having two elements to an alternation. You can do large, small, medium, small, large, small, medium, small, large. Okay, so that generates yet another pattern. And then you have the effect of radiating. So right now these are all parallel lines, so you can see these are all parallel. But then, again, if you want to be more, you can large, small, medium, small, large, small, medium, small, large. And as you can see that I've tried to change the angle. Right now it's radiating this way. You see how there's a slight change in that pattern. So that kind of makes things pretty neat, interesting to look at. What else do we have? Okay, so I can do the same thing down here. Let's flare that, flare this. I'll lock the transparency. Or actually, I'll unlock the transparency, and I can still do. All right, I can still do a rounded pattern. I can bias. So if I want, I'll slant this. You can change the way the clothing works by slanting it like this, and then here I'll cut that back to a 90-degree, and there now I've got small, medium, small. Okay, so I'm slanting this way. Actually, I can do ascending, so ascending even. So it just gets small, larger, larger, larger. I'll try and change the rate at which it gets larger. Okay, so that's another thing you can do, is you can ascend gradually like that, and it can be made to follow a line like that. Or if you don't want to have any kind of decorative frilly edges or whatnot, then you can, I'll show you one other kind of pattern that I like using, especially for science fiction. I like using this for a lot of my science fiction type uniforms, is straight lines, but with I will take this whole line, this whole horizontal span, and I'll divide it into 3 parts, like so. And 2/3 of the way here, 2/3 of the way here, this is the ratio that I use. So I work in terms of thirds, and I'll do this. All right, 2/3 of the way I use a thick, the rest of it I use a thin, and then I can take a white and I can do the same thing. I can cut into this, right? That kind of looks a bit more interesting. I can also take this and I can cut into it as well. So I can cut into it in opposite directions. Or, you know, if I want, I can cut into it a second time and then cut into it again. I'm just looking at, right now I'm kind of fiddling and trying to figure out, you know, good places to cut it. So this looks, you know, it's kind of a neat little blending between styles. Then I can, if I want, I can apply yet another border. Right. So, you know, when it comes to any kind of trims, there's really a lot that you can do. Sometimes I like the simple stuff though. And then up here at the top, you know, I can also, you know, I can cut this one's not so much a trim as it is, you know, I'm just cutting in a new design, but you know, you can make the design fall over the shoulder like that, you know, and that makes it look a bit more interesting. And then I can cut into here. I should probably have used a brush for that. So I'll switch back to my brush tool. And then I'll go back to a shape tool and use the shape tool to cut. I'll cut you know, 2/3 of the way in, and you'll see how that works. You know, and then you can do things like you can place insignias or badges. Those are all things you can do. So you know, there's a lot of things you can do in terms of you know, trims and cuts. And sometimes one thing I like doing, kind of an odd work of mine, is, you know, after you put in a collar, you can put, you know, a tag. Right? There's a shirt tag in there. So it's like something you'd actually buy at a store. You know, things like that. There's manufacturing markings. There's, you know, if I look at a person from the side, so this is just a torso with no arms, and kind of creepy. But anyway, actually, hang on. Okay, so if I simply had this torso, and let me just shape that neck part up here a bit. Okay, so again, you know, if I have the torso on there, I can form fit the clothing to that torso, and then I'll lock the transparency and use my brush, and here we are. I can figure out where are the seam lines. So seam lines for things like the shoulder. I can figure out where the collar is, right? So try and divide it up according to, you know, where the fabric is divided. You know, where you got to look at the tailoring of the fabric, and then, right? So things like this, even the seam lines become a part of the design as well. Oh, we are just about out of time. But, you know, you get, I hope this kind of gives you some good ideas as to how you can add some interesting detail to, you know, clothing with just the trims. I mean, this does not cover things like houndstooth patterns and checkerboard patterns and stripes and whatnot, but, you know, something to consider, you know, when you're doing your clothing designs. Okay.